Over the past several years, especially with the pandemic, mental health has been brought to the forefront now more than ever. More than 4.5 million Black and African American people reported having a mental illness, and more than 22% of those reported a serious mental illness over the past year, according to Mental Health America. However, in minority communities, there are many barriers to mental health. Thanks for joining us for this week's Health News You Can Use. I'm Lindsay Stish. This week, we're talking about minority mental health, the stigma surrounding it, and the importance of mental health access. With me today is Debra Robinson, a psychotherapist at St. Luke's Health System. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So first of all, Debra, although it's improved over time, there is still some stigma associated with seeking mental health help. Can you explain some of the reasons there is this stigma in the minority community in particular?
Yes. For one thing, I think there's a lot of misinformation and ignorance about what it means to be mentally healthy. We are so used to being under stress and struggling, and that becomes a comfortable way of dealing with life, particularly in the Black American community and minority community. So oftentimes you don't know what it means to be mentally healthy, or even how do I go about obtaining good mental health.
Okay. So what do you think is important moving forward to help break this stigma?
I think a lot of education. I think we've come a long way, but I think education is going to be vitally important, continued education about what mental health is, how to access the services, what signs to recognize when you do need to seek services. So oftentimes that is missing in our communities.
Okay. So what are some of the myths or core beliefs that may be preventing some from seeking help?
A lot of times people are afraid to come forward for help because they feel like they'll be labeled. There's already a disproportionate amount of Black Americans and African Americans that are being labeled, overly diagnosed and overly labeled. So people are very afraid of that. There's also historic racism, institutionalized racism that we remember. And so there's oftentimes, if you've had a poor experience with any institution, be it medical, educational, and particularly mental health, you're going to be less reluctant to seek the help. And there's also a strong family and cultural dynamic that plays into that, because oftentimes our families are the main ones that are discouraging us from seeking help. Oh, there's nothing wrong with you. It's minimized. Oh, you're going to be seen as crazy, or you're going to be drugged up. There's all kinds of misinformation about it. And so that's where a lot of the barriers are.
So let's talk about the benefits of therapy.
First of all, people need to know that it is private and confidential. We can't release any information that you talk to us about without your permission. So I'm hoping that that helps people relax a little bit, because oftentimes, particularly in the Black community, we are taught that we don't want anyone else in our business, and nothing that happens in the house, needs to go outside. So this is hopefully reassuring people that it's private and confidential. Therapy also helps to break a lot of generational curses. The other benefits is that you have someone who is looking at your life and your situation with a different lens. And so my lens is more objective. I'm not as close to it. And then I can help you process information differently. It will greatly enhance your mental wellness. And so if nothing else, you need to know that you're worth seeking the mental health for.
Okay. Now, why is it important to have more mental health providers of color?
Well, everyone wants to be understood and heard. And I think that there's a belief that if I meet with a person of color, their same framework and their value system and just the worldview will be similar to myself. You're already feeling misunderstood and struggling anyway before you come into therapy. So to see someone who looks like you and can reflect back to you the same worldview, and that's not always the case, but for the most part, it's just very refreshing to have that person where you don't have to over-explain or sometimes feel intimidated or judged if it's not a person of color.
Right, or someone with the same experience.
Exactly.
Absolutely. So if someone's contemplating looking for mental health help, what advice do you have for them?
If they have insurance, I would ask them to start with their insurance company first. They have all kinds of resources built in. They have a whole website of providers and professionals, and you get to pick and choose what you feel would work for you. If you only want a female, you can pick that. If you want someone with a certain expertise, you can pick that. So you get to choose what kind of therapist you want, and then they will kind of spit that information out to you. Often, also you can Google, and there's also several websites now that cater to therapists of color, such as KC Color Collective, and there are also Facebook groups where you can seek out therapists too of color.
Well, that's great. Well, what's your final message today for people watching?
Don't be afraid. I always feel like people have so much courage when they walk into my office, and I always applaud that. Mental health is vitally important, and if we don't take care of our mental health, we are eventually going to fall apart physically because our minds and bodies are very linked. And so mental health is vitally important. We've seen that the last 2 years with COVID and the impact that it's had on mental health. So don't be afraid to seek it. You are worth seeking the help for. And I always encourage people to don't be afraid to seek it and just go for it.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for joining us to talk about this important topic.
Thank you for having me.
To find out more about St. Luke's behavioral health and how to get an appointment with a mental health provider, visit stlukeskc.org/behavioral. You can also stay up to date with all of the latest developments on the COVID pandemic and other health news from St. Luke's at stlukeskc.org/news. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you next time on Health News You Can Use.